a certificate of good standing from the Illinois Secretary of State showing that your business is in good standing with the state. For sole proprietors or partnerships that are operating under a name, other than the owner's name, submit certificate of ownership. This is to verify that the business has completed all proper assumed name filing, doing business as registration requirements with the Kane County Clerk's Office. You'll also be required to provide a roster of employees for the pay period that includes March 1st, 2020, along with an indication of the number of hours worked by each employee during that pay period. And the reason for that is, as you'll recall, one of the requirements to be eligible under this program is that you have no more than 50 full-time equivalent employees as of March 1st. So in order to determine that, we'll need to know the number of hours as well for that pay period for each employee. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Additionally, if you have annual financial statements for 2019 that have been audited, reviewed, or compiled by an outside accountant, the county is requesting that you provide that as part of your application. Also, a copy of your 2019 IRS tax return. We know there are some businesses that their return may be filed on the Federal Form 1040 for the owner's personal return. In that case, we would just need the Schedule C from the 1040 that provides the tax return information specific to the business. Next slide. Also, as a part of the application, there will be a section that requests you to upload monthly profit and loss statements, and these will be monthly statements for each month from January 1st, or excuse me, from January 2019 through July 2020. And as a part of that section of the application, there's also an attachment A, which is a budget and narrative for costs that were already incurred between March 1st, 2020 and September 30th. And we will talk about these items here on the next couple of slides. You can go to the next slide. So just so everyone's on the same page, I know many of you know what a profit and loss statement is. I just wanted to talk through it briefly. When we ask for a profit and loss statement, we are asking for what also is referred to as an income statement that provides your revenue, your expenses, gains or losses, and results in your net income for a specific period of time. In this case, we're asking for it on a monthly basis. And the reason for that is that also, as you'll recall, one of the requirements to be eligible is that your business experienced a reduction in revenue during the pandemic. Providing this information will help us verify that, in fact, there was a reduction of revenue. And again, these will be monthly statements from January 2019 through July 2020. And these can be, there's a lot of accounting software that automatically generates these types of reports. QuickBooks is a pretty common software that's used. You can generate, balance sheets for any and income statements for any certain period. And so those internally generated statements are perfectly fine for this purpose. You could also just create them in Excel if you do not have the ability to do that out of your current software. Next slide, please. This is Exhibit A, which is the budget summary for small businesses, where you will submit with your application expenses that were eligible costs incurred between March 1st, 2020 and September 30th, 2020. I know you likely cannot read, may not be able to read this on the slide. It's pretty small, but this document is online. It is an Excel file, and we'll kind of talk through what's on this budget document. What you'll see when you go in to create your application is you will see the spreadsheet, and on the first tab of the spreadsheet there are instructions for completing the spreadsheet, as well as it provides a lot of information that you've already heard today as far as what's an eligible expense and that sort of thing. So that's the first tab. This image on this PowerPoint slide is the second tab of this Excel file. And this is where you'll fill in your expenses that you've incurred that you believe are eligible for reimbursement under this program. The kind of gold colored portions are the portions that you will complete with your application. And kind of in the middle section there is where you'll enter your expenses. And so they are broken out by eligible expense type that Bethany was discussing earlier. So there is a section for your rent or mortgage payments, a section for utility costs, a section for PPE, etc. And so under each one of those sections, if you have eligible expenses, you'll detail them line by line on this budget spreadsheet. And there's basically three things that you'll indicate. In the first column, describe the expense in detail. And the second column is where you'll provide your justification for eligibility under the program. And then the third column will be the amount that is requested for potential reimbursement under your application. Now, there are some examples that are already included in there. Of course, when you complete the budget, you will delete those examples and put your actual expenses in. Just an example of how you would document an expense. So for example, for your rent payment, you may document in the first column rent payments for May 2020 while the business was closed due to the pandemic. And for your justification, you put your doors were closed during May 2020, and therefore you had no income for that period, or whatever the justification is. And then you have the amount requested for reimbursement in the third column. Also at the bottom, there's a place that you will sign and date, which certifies you believe that all the costs are true, correct, and compliant with the program. Next slide, please. As you submit your application, there will be a section where you'll upload monthly balance sheets, again, for the period of January 2019 through July 2020. And under this section, there will also be an attachment for, similar to the attachment A budget narrative for costs already incurred, there will be another budget for costs yet to be incurred that are anticipated to be incurred between October 1st and December 30th that fall under those eligible expense categories. Next slide, please. Again, just to make sure we're all on the same page, just an example of a balance sheet here, which presents the company's financial position at a certain point in time. So that'll include assets, such as cash, accounts receivable, investments, etc. liabilities such as accounts payable, accruals, debt, and equity. So this is an example on the screen of a kind of typical balance sheet for a company. Next slide. If the applicant is a chamber of commerce, there will be a requirement to upload the most recently filed Form 990 and the IRS determination letter regarding the nonprofit status. Kind of as a side note, one thing that's important to note just in the application process is that no applications that are submitted in hard copy or by email will be accepted. All the applications need to be, all the application information and material with the application need to be submitted via the online application portal. Next slide. We're nearing the end of the presentation here, but there's a couple things that we just want to discuss here at the end. Again, thank you everybody. As you submit questions, again, we will review them and they'll be put in writing again through an FAQ document that'll be available on the Kane County's Coronavirus Relief Fund webpage. So I know there's been some questions submitted, but I just wanted to again reiterate that. But if Bethany, you go to the next slide, we can talk about a couple other points here real quickly. One question that you may have is, so far we've talked about just the application process, but if you are, your application is approved and you are awarded funds, what documentation will be needed to ultimately request reimbursement of your expenses? So some of the documentation that will be requested, again, this is not with the application, this is further down the road when actual reimbursement request for the funds is submitted. We would request any invoices, check copies, other proof of payment for any of the expenses that you are requesting for reimbursement, copies of contracts for services that are necessary to respond to COVID-19, and a copy of your, if you are requesting reimbursement for mortgage or rent payments, then a copy of your mortgage agreement or your rental agreement. And again, I also want to reiterate that at that point, during the actual reimbursement request process, it's important to provide adequate supporting documentation for all of your expenses. If adequate supporting documentation is not provided, then those expenses will not be approved by the county. Next slide, please. One kind of unique situation, as you'll recall, Bethany mentioned that all these expenses must be incurred before December 30th, 2020. Well, one question is, what if we've incurred the expense, but we have not actually received the service as of December 30th, 2020? There is some flexibility under U.S. Treasury guidance that if the cost was incurred before December 30th, but the service cannot be delivered until after because the delay is caused by the public health emergency. In other words, whoever you're requesting a service from cannot provide the service specifically because of a COVID-19 public health emergency delay, then it could still be an eligible cost, but the purchase must be completed, or contract must be completed before December 30th, and the actual cause of the delay must be well documented at that time when those expenses are requested for reimbursement. And I am going to throw it back to Bethany to wrap up.
Thank you, Josh. So we mentioned the King County Coronavirus Relief Fund page, web page, which we're also calling a portal. This is what it looks like on the screen, and this is where you download your application. I'm sorry, you fill in the application. You can download the required forms. You upload your budget spreadsheets that support your application, as well as the other documentation that is required during the application. It's also where you will find the FAQ document that will be updated. So one thing in closing, just to emphasize again, that this King County CRF program for small businesses is on a first come, first serve basis. So completed completed applications with that required documentation will get priority consideration. If it's incomplete, it won't be considered. So when you go onto the website, you'll scroll down and this is what you'll see. There's a section specifically for the small business grant application, and it provides there the links to the budget spreadsheets, both the spreadsheet for the costs already incurred from March 1st to September 30th, and the second one is for costs incurred that you anticipate between October 1st and December 30th. So you do have to fill in both if you expect to incur costs during both time periods. And so the website lists out all of the eligibility that we outlined in today's webinar, and also provides links to the other resources we talked about. So that website is ready, and the applications will be available today for you to start working on. And as a recap here, the next steps are for you to submit the application online by October 2nd with 5 p.m. Central Time. And then once your applications are approved, you will get a notice and an invitation to enter an award recipient agreement with King County to establish you and enable you to receive payments for eligible reimbursement expenses. So we can't say it enough, if at any time you have questions throughout this program, including about the application process or later on when you're submitting reimbursement requests, the best way to get your questions answered is to email that email address on the slide, which is crf@co.kane.il.us. And we will address your questions in writing as soon as possible. So the same message here is that any questions that you have based on today's webinar, the best way to address those is by asking those in an email to the address on the screen. And then you'll all be notified once the FAQ document is uploaded and ready for you to review on that CRF webpage. So that concludes today's presentation. Fabiola, is there any other item of business that you would like us to address before we adjourn here?
Yes. Excuse me there, I have to adjust my microphone. Please keep in mind the eligibility requirements were set by the CAC. Those are out of our control. If there are any concerns that you have regarding this eligibility, please bring them to their attention. The application will be made available later today. And it is very important, again, to reiterate, having all of your documentation ready. This application portal is one time only. You do not create a login or a password. You will not be able to come back and upload and finish your application. And the best way to be on top of any updates to the program is to keep visiting our website. That website will be uploaded with the most current information as it becomes available today. The webinar, the PowerPoint presentation, and the FAQs will be made available via that webpage.
So with that, we thank everyone for what you're doing to serve your communities, and thank you for joining us today. we will follow up to provide. We'll make the video recording, the webinar recording, as well as the PowerPoint presentation and the FAQ document available to you as soon as possible, all on that webpage. So thank you for joining today, and we will be in touch. Take care.